Hello, 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 hello. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are on our globe. My name is Stroda Aglago. Thank you for joining in, tuning in, and of course, spending a little bit of your weekend with me. Excuse me. I don't even know where to start, but today is exciting. I'm excited to talk about something very important. I hope everybody had a great week. And of course, and you're well rested and getting ready for Monday. Now, excuse me. Today's topic I find very interesting because I tackle this in my line of work all the time, and it's a debilitating thing, and I find it's important for me to visit this from time to time. I've talked about it a couple of times ago, but it's mainly this self-loathing idea that we think the will of God is not for us and that salvation is not ours, and we can't even deserve it, or we don't even measure up, which it breaks my heart when I hear people say this. And those who come to me for coaching sometimes, and they want to talk about spirituality or God, our maker, our creator, our source, the universe. Sometimes I do go there, of course, with the person's permission and request to allow that discussion. And of course, usually I do give a disclaimer that I am not an expert on God. Of course, I'm just someone who believes, and that's it. And of course, I'm not one who would say I know everything about God. I'm still learning. I don't think there's anyone, if there is, good for them. But I don't think anyone that will say I know every single detail bit about God. And that I wouldn't even attempt to make such a bold statement. But I'm still learning and growing in Him and becoming more aware of His resolve and strength and, of course, provision. One thing I want to start with is this. There's always opposites in everything. In every thought process, every behavior we create or engage in, there's always another side to it. Call it a duality of sorts. No matter how you are feeling, it is important to recognize that, if you are feeling bad, there's always a possibility to feel good. When you are angry, you can make the choice to not be emotionally charged and engage in that anger for too long. When you are hurt, become someone who believes that hurt can be undone. Maybe not completely reverse to where you were before the hurts happened, but understand that hurt can be healed. It is possible for the hurt to be healed, for the pain and the injury and the scars to be healed. And this is a quote from A Course in Miracles. The will of God is your salvation. God will not and does not show you the way of salvation for sake of trying to hide something from you. Let me rephrase that. That was not very clear. God's will is not to prevent you from salvation or receiving his salvation. Because his will is to make sure you have joy, peace, and endless, like the joy should be endless and it should be abundantly clear to you. That happiness is very important. No matter what you do, who you are, where you're going, what you've done, God's will is not being kept from you. It is available to all of you. There's no interference. Rather, when you begin to say to yourself that you do not deserve it, you're not worthy of that love, you're not worthy of the salvation for God's will for you, then you create a separation from God's will to you, which was always there anyways. It was never gone. One way or the other, you created this painful understanding, realization, be it the experience of trauma, pain, rejection, disillusions from, could be parents, friends, or ideals that were not clear or were not never realized, and it shake you to your core and traumatize you to the extent that you actually started believing and creating this facade that God's will for you does not exist, when in actual fact it does. Doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, where you are. God's will is your salvation, and it's not kept from anybody. When the separation happens, or you created this because of the hurt, you pulled your way, while in actual truth, source was never separate from you. Every day, every second, every time, you are given an opportunity to change that perspective. Understanding this will give you the strength. Understanding this will definitely give you the strength to go on. And in opening your will, see, here's the thing, the will of God is your salvation. You don't have to do anything except surrender your will to that. I know that sounds too simple, but it's the truth. When you surrender your will to God's will, it's amazing, it's beautiful. And every single day and every single hour, every minute, we are given an opportunity to surrender that. Because our will never be taken away unless we truly surrender that to God, and then God's will join with yours. It's beautiful. It creates some amazing joy. I don't know about you, but when I became aware of this, I didn't waste any time in surrendering my will to God's. Allowing the salvation and God's will to be present in your life is key. Every time and every day and every minute you choose not to surrender to God's will, you deprive yourself of that endless joy. That joy of trust and content in Him. It is God's will for His children to be happy. Contrary to what some people may say, and I've heard different things, and I'm not going to discuss that. The problem with us human is this, which is so sad sometimes. We get in the way of God's will if we do not surrender our will to God. We get in the way of that endless joy, that happiness. And in doing so, we give up all that joy and happiness to our ego. And ego then decides it knows better than God's will. That is the truth. Ego starts to believe and decide that it knows better than God's will. And it is going to choose for you and for God, which is preposterous. Beyond anything I could ever imagine. Ego begins to think that it knows better. And it can make you happy by being miserable. Because that misery is what is familiar to you. That misery is what is familiar to ego. That misery is what ego has conditioned you and taught you to believe and accept and take that as truth. When it has no truth to it. There's no facts to that. Ego cannot be happen. How do you know that ego is the one making decisions? When misery becomes your constant cornerstone. You keep going back to what misery tells you, what ego tells you. And you find that you're exhausted and are not able to find joy, peace, surrender, calm. There's always that fight. Feeling that you gotta struggle when the will of God is for you to be happy and have joy. So for that, God will make a way and access because it's the universal source. It knows all of it and knows how you get to point A to point B. So if you do not surrender to that, you keep going around in circle and never get into point B. But sometimes you start telling yourself, but I'm making progress. When you really pay attention, you realize you're not making any progress at all. Rather, you're back to where you were, point A, and haven't moved an inch. My brothers and sisters, how long would you allow ego to steal from you? Distract you from what rightly belongs to you? And prolong the pain of misery of what ego dishes out to you far much longer than it needed to be in order for you to be able to bask in the endless joy that the universe promised you. It's your birthright as a child of God. It's your birthright as the apple of your father's eye. But you allow ego to steal this from you. Tells you lies. tells you pain is better than joy. How is that possible? All you have to do is surrender to God. I don't know about you, but that doesn't frighten me. But I hear a lot of people get frightened by that because ego has beaten you to a place of lies that it tells you that I am safer than God, the one who created you and created the universe and is the universe. But ego has convinced you that you should be afraid of that. That's surrender. That means you're afraid of love. You are afraid of truth. You are afraid of the one truth that would never change, that would never bend, that is in you. But ego has convinced you the lie. The strange thing is, another false thing ego tells you is this: that you can create, or another false thing that you create in yourself and believe is that if I stop worrying and if I give my will to God and surrender to Him, then I will not have to do anything. Bingo. Even though this is coming out of fear, the truth of the matter is, meanwhile, that is the point right here, that I do not have to do anything. God doesn't want you to do anything in order to have salvation. You cannot earn it. You cannot buy it. You cannot manipulate your way into it. You cannot do deeds to gain salvation from God. It's His will for you. By virtue of you belong to Him. You are His. He created you for His purpose. And the purpose that He sent you to do here. And you can only step into that if you accept Him. And you accept truth of your birthright, of who you are, and who you belong to. It is yours. Then this question comes in mind. How do you begin to surrender to the will of God? That's a lot, but I'll try and break them down into small portions. And then who knows, as time goes on, I may visit again and discuss more of this. But right now, I'll go through maybe 6 or 8 points. How do you begin to surrender your will to God? Because there has to be that joint. I need to explain why that joint will needs to be happening. God gave all of us a very important thing. Every human being. There are 2 things He gave us that sets us apart from all of creation, every creature on the planet. He gave us, number 1, the ability to express ourselves through speech. Number 2, He gave us a will, or some people call it mind. Our will is so sacred such a sacred bond we have with God, with our will, that God will not change it, force it, or manipulate it. Because that will is through that will that we're able to create and use our imagination to create anything we need and want and desire. God does not take that away, and He will never. That is something I know as I know. God will never take your will or force it in all of time. It will not happen, because that's a sacred thing He has with us. That's why God's will is your salvation. But you must have joint will with God. You must give your will, surrender your will, and trust in His will. And together, wow, powerful. That's how it happens. So how do you surrender that will? Because when you think about it, I always say this. Have you ever tried to control, manipulate a 2-year-old to do your will? It's honestly, I have never seen it. If a 2-year-old wills themselves to do one thing, they will do it. And they are very strong in stating their will, because it is what it is. So surrender your will to God. How do you begin to do so? Number 1, trust God and His will. You've got to trust. I don't know about you. I don't even trust myself as much as I trust God. I could never trust myself as much. I can only trust Him. I can only trust God's wisdom and God's voice and His direction and will for me. Number 2, let go of the things that block you, meaning habits, behaviors, attitudes, like doubt, thinking and telling yourself, it's impossible for God to do this. It cannot be done by God. How could this be done? Let go of that notion. Let go of those thoughts, because it'll block you. Oh, how come God did this for somebody and not for me? Well, maybe I don't deserve it. I can't have it. I'm not supposed to have it. God only gives it to other people, but not me. Those thoughts are limiting behaviors that doesn't help you cultivate opening yourself up for God's will to operate in your life and in you. Number 3, forgive. Forgive those who have harmed you. Forgive those who hurt you knowingly, unknowingly, who have done something to hurt you. Let go of the grudge. Any kind of grudge they have against you, or you have against them. Forgive it. Forgive one another. Forgive your brother and sister. And forgive yourself. Because forgiveness is powerful. It's almost like if you had to have a channel or a roadmap to connect to God's salvation for you and God's will for you. Forgive. And forgive yourself for not knowing any better, but now you know. So you're forgiven and letting go. Number 4. Understand that God's will is perfect. Nothing can top God's will. Nothing can compare to God's will. There is no comparison with anything else. Nothing. There's nothing. Anything you think you know, you've experienced and heard, there is nothing more perfect than God's will. Understand this, and it's a whole new world. Number 5. God knows you and hears and knows the desires of your heart. God knows you and knows and hears your desires of your heart. No mistake about that. And I'm going to read something in regards to the will of God. In the Lord's Prayer that Jesus taught us, in Matthew chapter 6, verse 10, it states this: Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Any questions or any mistake about God's will? So when you have a joint will with God, you say, thy will be done. That is you surrendering and agreeing to join your will to God's, to allow God's will both here in earth and in heaven done for you. Is there any confusion? Number 6. Release the anxiety of control, your own control. You keep holding on to things and wanting to control things and see it as it should be. Because sitting on the sidewalk and having anxiety about trusting God is purely ego driven. It's purely ego centered. It's purely ego's plan, and it is purely ego's direction. Ego created that anxiety of trusting God, and that caused anxiety. Trusting the one who made you, gave you breath, and every breath you take, you're choosing to have anxiety about letting go to that. That should tell you something. Something that obvious should debunk ego's lies that ego tells you. So make the choice to ask ego the question, how could the creator that gave me life and is still giving me life, and every minute I breathe is a confirmation of his will for me and truth of my existence and his favor on me. Why should I fear that? Why should I cause me anxiety? Ego can't answer that question for you because it has no answer. It cannot come back to try and defend itself against God's truth. And I'll read this. Anxiety and God's kingdom. That is Matthew chapter 6, verse 24 to 26. I'll try and read it quick. I know the verses are kind of long. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he would hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve God and mammon. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what ye shall eat, or what ye shall drink, nor yet for your body, what ye shall put on it. Is not the life more than meat, and the body than remnant? Behold the fowls of the air, meaning the birds of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feed them. Are you not much better than that? That's a given question. Are you not much better than that? If the birds and the bees all are provided for and taken care of, how much more you? So the question is, why would you choose ego's lies over God's love and despise God's love and truth and salvation and his will for you? That is a deeper question. Every time the anxiety comes up about trusting God and letting go, but then you choose to stay in that misery, ask yourself, the birds are happy and free and going around. They don't even do anything and they still have enough food. It's all effortless. How much more you? Aren't you more important? It's right there in red as the direct words spoken by Christ Jesus. My brothers and sisters, the will of God can only bring you joy, endless joy. Why would you waste time, a minute, a second longer, than to take your birthplace and your birthright of what belongs to you? You don't have to earn it and try and be something that you're not. Take a look at this. That is how you're going to become free in truth. And understand The duality exists except when it comes to God. There is no other. There is no opposite. There is no comparison to anything or any other being. Everything else, there's an opposite, not with God. I hope this was clear. And it is clear. And any of my brothers and sisters out there nervous about trusting God and fearful, fear no more. You can go and read up on it yourself. Learn it. Understand His will for you. Grow in that. And spend the time learning and understanding this. And keep gathering the knowledge and wisdom you need for your purpose to come through. Because the sooner you do that work in understanding and joining your will to God's, you become clear to your purpose as to why you were created in the first place. And that place will be open and held for you until you are ready, or you make the choice to stand and step into it. As a child of God, you're special. You're loved. You are protected. And everything can be healed. There isn't any hurt or pain that cannot be healed. There isn't any trauma that cannot be healed. Don't sit with the pain of the trauma and hurt and believe it's the end of you. No, it's not the end of you. It's just a fraction. Don't let it distract you from who you are. Don't let it take anything from you. The more time you spend in ruminating, griping, replaying that hurt, the pain over and over and over, it takes you from ever experiencing the joy. It delays that joy experience. Why do that to yourself? That's what I'd like to know. Why do that to yourself, my brothers and sisters? Be as you are in Him. The doubt that ego is telling you, it's never going to keep you safe. It's not going to give you joy. I hear people say, well, at least I'm doing something. Precisely, you're not supposed to do anything, though. And people say, then I have nothing. Yes. You have nothing of this world that keeps you bound to the lie. But you will gain so much more of the will of God. That's up to you to find out and enjoy. Become the beautiful, loving, kind, peaceful child that God created. It's possible. No matter what chaos you believe you've seen, no matter what chaos you've experienced, no matter what lies you've been told, and time again, you can always choose. Make a choice. Allow your will. Join with the will of God. Because God will never force you to join your will to His. It's a sacred will that will never be forced or broken or taken away. So sometimes I hear people and they say, oh, they can make somebody do things. They can will somebody. And I'm like, I get confused because I'm like, you can? Really? God himself does not do that. So what makes you think you can do so? That sometimes blows my mind when I hear people say they're going to do that, or they're doing or trying to, like I said before, try and manage and control a 2-year-old. And let's see how far that goes. So far, what I have learned is I learned to work with a 2-year-old so that we can still get things done, so we can still be able to live peacefully and happily. Allow yourself to choose the will of God, because it's only there to give you peace, joy, so you can become the person that you were meant to be all along, without any hindrance. There are no limits in God. Ego will tell you there are limitations. Ego will tell you what you cannot do. The truth is, the will of God tells you what you can. And it's unlimited. There is no limit in God. In the universe. In source. Be it the name you call him. Become strong in his will. And you'll be amazed. Oh my goodness. You would be amazed about what you discover about yourself and the plans God made for you. I hope today was worth your while and your time. I appreciate you. I appreciate you staying with me for a year. I can't believe it's been over a year since I started doing this. I enjoy this and I thank you so much. I think it's been a year and 2 weeks now. I thank you. I appreciate every one of you. God bless you. And I can't say enough about my appreciation for God's presence and directing me and teaching me to speak and empower, motivate, and of course inspire and encourage my brothers and sisters out there. Thank you. God bless you. Those of you who watch or listen on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and of course follow us on Twitter, Facebook. In 2 weeks, which will be in 2 weeks, in 2 weeks I'll be doing 2 weeks after next week I'll be doing another live stream on Facebook. I believe starting June 1st I'll be doing a webinar, classes on forgiveness. When I set up the dates and time and everything, I will announce it so we can get together on the webinar and then do some classes, some work on forgiveness. And working is going to be more like a 6 weeks course that I will put together. We will work on that. Thank you. Have an amazing week. God bless you. And I love every single one of you, even though I haven't met you, but I know you're my brothers and sisters out there. So for that, I am grateful and I am thankful. Bye. See you next week.